My name is Sarah Callahan. I am 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, my aunt stood in a probate courtroom and pointed at me like I was the problem. She held up a printed screenshot of my employee profile from the diner's website. Smiling, apron on, coffee pot raised. She said it like a verdict. "She is just a waitress, Your Honor." The room did not laugh, but her attorneys smiled, and the judge looked at me the way people look at something they have already decided about. What none of them knew was that I had been building my answer for 4 months. Not out of spite, out of certainty. This is the story of how my aunt tried to take my grandmother's bakery, her house, and 17 years of everything she built, and what happened when I finally let the truth into the room. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is the place where we share stories about family betrayal, quiet strength, and what happens when people underestimate the wrong person. If you are new here, subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. My grandmother, Rosalie Ferrante, came to the United States from Palermo in 1974 with $40, a recipe book her mother had written by hand, and a name no one in our Ohio town could pronounce on the first try. By the time I was born, she owned a bakery on Clement Street called Rosalie's. The sign was hand-painted in blue and gold. The smell inside was flour and anise and the particular warmth of an oven that had been running since 4 in the morning. I grew up in that bakery. My mother died when I was 7, a car accident on Route 9 in February, black ice. Nothing anyone could have done. My father's sister took my father in. Rosalie took me. She did not make a ceremony of it. She just cleared out the back bedroom, bought a second set of sheets, and enrolled me in the school 2 blocks from the bakery. Every morning before school, she handed me a small paper bag with a roll inside it. Not because we were poor, because she believed that starting the day with something you made with your hands was the closest thing to a prayer she knew. Rosalie kept a wooden recipe box on the shelf above the register. It was painted blue, chipped at the corners, with a small gold latch that did not quite close anymore. Her mother had given it to her. Inside were index cards in her mother's handwriting, in Italian, in pencils so faint you had to hold them at an angle to read them. I was not allowed to touch the box until I was 12. When she finally handed it to me, she said, "A recipe is not just instructions. It is a conversation with everyone who cooked it before you." I did not understand what she meant then. I do now. My Aunt Patricia was Rosalie's other daughter. She was 12 years older than my mother, already out of the house by the time my mother was in high school. Patricia moved to Columbus, married twice, built a life she described as sophisticated, and a life Rosalie described as distant. Patricia came to the bakery at Christmas sometimes. She sent birthday cards. She called on Rosalie's birthday and talked for about 4 minutes before the conversation ran out of things to hold it up. She never asked about the recipe box. She never asked about the books Rosalie kept, or the repairs the building needed, or whether my grandmother was sleeping well. She came, she ate a pastry, she left. And Rosalie never said anything against her. Not once. She kept Patricia's photograph on the shelf next to the register, right beside the wooden recipe box. She mailed her a card every Easter. She saved a seat for her at every important thing. Patricia came to none of them. I finished high school with honors. I applied to the culinary program at Johnson & Wales and got in on a partial scholarship. Rosalie paid the rest without being asked. I graduated in 3 years. I came home. I took over the bakery's morning operations while Rosalie managed the books, and I started making the kind of changes that small family businesses need: online ordering, a wholesale account with 2 local restaurants, a catering arm for weddings and corporate events. In 2 years, revenue was up 31%. Rosalie watched all of this and said nothing except, "You have the hands for it." I also had a business degree from a program I had finished online at night over 18 months while working the 4 a.m. shift. Rosalie knew. Patricia did not know because Patricia had never asked. When Rosalie got sick, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in the fall, I moved back into the house. I slept in the back bedroom again, in the same room where I had slept at 7 years old after my mother died. I handled her appointments. I drove her to treatment. I managed the bakery during the day and sat with her in the evenings while she told me things she wanted me to remember, about her mother, about Palermo, about what flour smells like in a kitchen where someone loves you. She died on a Thursday in March. I was holding her hand. The attorney read the will 10 days later. Rosalie had left me the bakery, the building it was in, the house on Clement Street, and her savings, approximately $340,000 total. She had left Patricia $50,000 as a lump sum. There was a handwritten letter attached to the will. Rosalie's penmanship was shaky in the last months, but the letter was clear. It said, "Patricia, I love you. I am leaving what I built to the person who stayed and helped me build it. This is not a punishment. It is an accounting." I read that letter standing at the attorney's table. I folded it carefully and put it in my coat pocket. Patricia was not at the reading. Her attorney called mine 2 days later. She came to Columbus 3 weeks after that. She drove a silver sedan and wore a blazer the color of old money. She asked to meet me at Rosalie's bakery. I said yes. I wanted to be on my grandmother's floor when Patricia made her case. She was warmer than I expected. She hugged me at the door. She smelled like a perfume that cost more than our weekly flower order. She picked up a pastry from the case and said, "Your grandmother taught you well, sweetheart." Her eyes were wet. For about 90 seconds, I almost believed she was grieving. Then she set the pastry down and said, "I just think we both know you are not equipped to manage all of this alone. A house, a building, a business. You are 29 years old." I looked at her. I said, "I have been managing it for 2 years. She tilted her head. Her expression did not change, but something behind it did. She said, "We just want to make sure Mama's legacy is protected."
We.
I noted the word. Patricia had come alone. I said, "The attorney reviewed everything. The will is clear." She smiled. She said she would be in touch. She left a half-eaten pastry on the counter and did not offer to pay for it. The filing arrived 11 days later. Patricia was contesting the will and petitioning to have me removed as executor. The petition said I lacked the financial sophistication and professional experience to manage an estate of this complexity. It said my grandmother had been in diminished capacity when the will was drafted. It said I was, and I am quoting, "a food service worker with no demonstrated background in asset management." I read that sentence 4 times at the kitchen table in my grandmother's house. The kitchen smelled like anise and old wood and the particular cold of a March night. The wooden recipe box was on the counter where Rosalie always kept it. My hands were not steady.
I want to be honest about that.
Not because I was afraid. Because I was angry in the way that does not make noise. I called my friend Danny Park at 9 that night. Danny and I had gone to culinary school together before she changed direction entirely and went to law school. She was an estate attorney in Cincinnati now. She picked up on the second ring and listened while I read her the filing. "They're going to make you look like the help," she said. "They want a judge to see an apron, not an operator. Incompetence by implication." "I know. We need everything," she said. "Revenue records, tax filings, the business plan, your degree. All of it. I know that too." I made a decision that night before I put the phone down. I would not correct Patricia's assumption before the hearing. I would let her build her entire case around a girl who made pastries. And then I would show the court what I had actually built. The next 3 weeks were quiet on the outside. I opened the bakery at 4 every morning. I made the croissants. I took the orders. I wiped the tables. What none of them knew was that every ordinary hour was also preparation. My employee Marta watched me from behind the proofing rack and did not ask questions. She had worked for Rosalie for 11 years. She knew what was happening. She kept her thoughts behind her eyes and her hands moving. One morning she leaned against the counter while I was restocking the pastry case and said, "Your grandmother used to say that the people who show up every day are the ones who deserve to be there." I did not respond, but I held it. At night, Danny and I assembled our case. 3 years of financial records. Business tax filings, clean, filed on time every year since I took over operations. Revenue reports showing 31% growth. The wholesale contracts. The catering arm's profit margin. My business degree completed while working full-time. And a letter, Rosalie's letter from the cedar box, notarized 6 months before she died, when her mind was still entirely her own. I also found something I had not known existed. Tucked behind the index cards in the wooden recipe box, in an envelope that smelled like the bakery, was a second letter. In Rosalie's handwriting, addressed to me by name. She had written it the previous summer, before the diagnosis, in the blue ink she always used for important things.
Sarah, it said.
If Patricia comes for what I built, it will not be for love of it. It will be for the idea of it. She never wanted the work. She only ever wanted the outcome. I am leaving this to you because you know the difference.
You always have.
I held that letter against my chest in the kitchen where my grandmother had taught me everything. I did not cry until I was sure I was alone. The night before the hearing, I sat in the bakery after closing. The lights were off. The cases were empty. The oven was cold. The wooden recipe box was on the shelf, where it always lived. I did not open it. I did not need to. I had memorized every word inside it. I turned off the last light and locked the door. Tomorrow I was going to sit in a courtroom and let my aunt call me everything she thought I was. And then I was going to stand up. The probate courtroom in our county is on the third floor of a building that also houses the clerk of courts and a notary public who keeps irregular hours. The hallway outside smells like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Inside, there are wooden benches, a state flag in the corner, and fluorescent lights that cast everyone slightly pale. I arrived at 8:40. The hearing was at 9:30. Danny was already at the respondent's table in a gray jacket, the evidence binder open in front of her. Blue cover. 71 pages. She had built it like a case because it was one. By 9, the gallery had filled. Marta sat in the second row. Behind her was Eduardo Marcos, our wholesale restaurant contact, a man who had worked with us for 18 months and could tell you our delivery schedule from memory. The woman from the church my grandmother had attended for 40 years sat beside him. 2 of Rosalie's neighbors were in the back. People who had watched me carry groceries and shovel snow and drive my grandmother to appointments. They did not need to be asked. They came because they knew. Patricia arrived at 9:15 with her attorney, a man named Greaves who carried his briefcase with the practiced confidence of someone who had won things in rooms like this before. Patricia wore a dark suit and understated jewelry. Her mascara was already slightly blurred, carefully so. Her husband Douglas came in behind her and sat beside her, without touching her. Judge Miriam Okafor entered at 9:30. Silver locks, reading glasses on a chain, a stillness about her that did not invite performance. Greaves opened for the petitioner. He walked to the center of the room and opened a folder. He was unhurried. "Your Honor," he said, "we are here because an elderly woman in declining health was convinced to restructure her estate in the final months of her life by the person who had daily access to her. We are not impugning motive. We are raising a question of capacity and undue influence." He reached into the folder and held up a photograph. It was from the bakery's website, my employee profile photo. Apron on. Smiling. Pastry case behind me. He set it on the judge's bench. "This is the person who currently controls $340,000 in assets and a commercial property on Clement Street." He let the silence settle. "A food service worker." Patricia nodded once from the petitioner's table. Slowly, like she was pained to agree. Greaves continued. He said the words carefully, like he was placing them. Limited financial acumen, no demonstrated asset management experience, food service background. He said food service the way people say it when they mean something smaller than it is. He said it 3 times. I counted. Patricia took the stand. She sat with her hands folded and her back straight, and told the court that her mother had been confused in her final months, that she had tried to be present but found herself shut out, that she had called and not received calls back, that she loved her mother and only wanted her legacy protected. She looked at me once while she spoke. Her eyes were wet. Her voice broke on the word legacy. It was practiced, but somewhere inside the performance was something that was not. I noted that too. Danny stood for cross-examination. She opened a folder of her own. "Ms. Ferrante, when did you last visit your mother in person before her diagnosis?" Patricia paused. "I visited regularly." Danny said, "Specifically, when?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "Christmas, 2 years ago." Danny made a note. "And during her 18 months of treatment?" Patricia looked at her hands. "I called frequently." Danny did not follow up. She did not need to. She sat back down. Douglas took the stand next. He crossed his legs and spoke about fiduciary responsibility and asset protection and the importance of professional management. He used the phrase someone qualified 4 times. He never specified what qualified meant.
Danny did.
Mr. Douglas, she said, standing for cross. What is the current status of Meridian Consulting, your firm? His expression did not change, but something underneath it did. We are in a restructuring period. Danny said, is it accurate that Meridian Consulting has outstanding creditor claims totaling approximately $180,000 filed in Franklin County over the past 8 months? The courtroom went still. Greaves stood. Objection. Relevance. Judge Okafor said, goes to motivation. I will allow it. Douglas uncrossed his legs. That is not relevant to this proceeding. Danny said, a man with $180,000 in creditor claims married the petitioner 14 months ago and is now supporting her bid for $340,000 in assets. I would suggest the court finds that relevant. She sat down and made a small mark on her legal pad. Douglas left the stand without looking at Patricia. If you have ever sat in a room where someone is using your quietest life against you, you know exactly what this moment feels like. The discipline it takes to stay seated. The decision not to speak. If this story is hitting close to home, drop a comment below. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. We are not finished. Judge Okafor called a recess at 11:15. I sat on the bench in the hallway. Danny came out and stood beside me. Douglas is the liability, she said. Greaves knows his case just got smaller. I said, when do we use the letter? She said, last. After everything else. I stayed on the bench and watched the clock above the water fountain. 20 minutes. Marta walked past once and pressed her hand to my shoulder without stopping. Eduardo leaned against the wall across from me and nodded once, the nod of a person who has watched you do hard work and knows what it costs. The afternoon session began at 12:45. Greaves had recalibrated. He came back with documentation, or what he framed as documentation. Photographs from the bakery's social media showing me behind the counter, at events, in the kitchen. Your Honor, he said, the respondent's entire professional identity is built around this establishment. She has a personal and financial interest in controlling it that goes beyond stewardship. He paused. We are not saying she is a bad person. We are saying she is not the right person. A food service worker should not be the sole executor of a $340,000 estate. He said it a third time. Food service worker. Like the repetition would make it more true. Judge Okafor set down her pen. She looked at Greaves. Counselor, do you have documentation of actual financial mismanagement? Improper transactions, missing funds, tax irregularities? Greaves shuffled papers. We are in the process of, she said. So you do not have them. Silence. She turned to Danny. The respondent may present her case. Danny stood. She walked to the center of the room the way you walk when you have already won, but you're going to be careful about it anyway. Your Honor, she said, opposing counsel has spent considerable time on my client's apron. I would like to spend some time on her record. She opened the binder to the first tab. She did not rush. My client holds a Bachelor of Business Administration, completed while working full-time at the family business she was already managing. She has served as de facto operations director of Rosalie's Bakery for 2 years, during which revenue grew 31%. She established 2 wholesale accounts and launched a catering division that now represents 19% of total revenue. Her tax filings are clean, current, and filed on time for every year she has managed operations. Every dollar in this estate is accounted for. She turned the page. She is not a food service worker, Your Honor. She is the reason this business survived. Marta, in the second row, pressed her lips together. Eduardo looked at the ceiling. The woman from the church put her hand over her mouth. Greaves did not object. There was nothing to object to. Danny placed a clear sleeve on the judge's bench. Inside it was the letter from the wooden recipe box. Rosalie's blue ink, her handwriting, dated 14 months before she died. Your Honor, I would like to submit a letter written by Rosalie Ferrante to the respondent. It was found in the decedent's personal effects after her passing. It is notarized and was witnessed by Marta Reyes, a long-term employee of the bakery. She read the key passage aloud. I am leaving this to you, because you know the difference between wanting the work and wanting the outcome.
You always have.
A woman in the back row made a sound she tried to swallow. Judge Okafor read the letter. She did not hurry. She set it down to her right and did not return it. Danny said, I would also like to call one character witness. Eduardo Marcos walked to the stand. He was 61, square-shouldered, a man who had spent 40 years in commercial kitchens and did not use extra words. Mr. Marcos, Danny said, how long have you worked with the respondent? He said, 18 months. Wholesale account. She said, how would you describe her management of the business? He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the judge. He said, she does not tell you she is competent.
She shows you.
Every week, on time, exactly what she said it would be. That is rare. Greaves declined to cross-examine. Judge Okafor looked at me directly. Miss Callahan, I have one question for you. I stood. The bakery. You could have managed it from a distance. Hired a manager. Why were you working the floor? I said, my grandmother taught me that you do not understand a thing unless you are willing to stand inside it every day. The recipe box, the early hours, the flour on your hands, that is not decoration. That is the job. I was not willing to manage from the outside something she had built from the inside. I paused. I would make the same choice again. Judge Okafor wrote something on her pad. She did not look up for a moment. Patricia was staring at the letter on the judge's bench. Her husband's seat was empty. Douglas had left during the recess and not returned. She was looking at her mother's handwriting across a room she had not thought to prepare for. Then she stood up. Greaves reached for her arm. She pulled away. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. She was my mother. That house was my home too. I grew up there. Judge Okafor said, ma'am, please. Patricia's voice cracked. I just wanted something of hers. I just wanted something left.
It was the truest thing she had said all day.
The courtroom held it for a moment. Greaves guided her back to her seat. She went. I looked at her.
I did not speak.
The room already knew everything it needed to know. If someone you loved ever left behind words that changed a room, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We are getting to the part you have been waiting for. Judge Okafor settled her glasses. She did not need notes. The petition to remove Sarah Callahan as executor of the Rosalie Ferrante estate is denied. She looked at Greaves. Counsel, I am troubled by the nature of this petition. Photographs of an apron are not evidence of incompetence. Evidence of incompetence is evidence of incompetence. If a petition of this kind is brought before me again, one that relies on lifestyle characterization in lieu of substantive documentation, I will consider sanctions. She picked up her gavel. The sound it made was small. It was the loudest thing in the room. Patricia sat for a long time after the ruling. The courtroom emptied around her. Douglas did not come back. Greaves packed his briefcase without speaking to her, without shaking her hand. He walked out the side door. She was alone at the petitioner's table with her purse in her lap and her mother's letter on the judge's bench. I watched her for a moment. She was looking at the letter. Not at me. At the letter. At her mother's handwriting in blue ink. And I saw something cross her face that was not performance. It was grief. Old grief. The kind that comes from a long distance and arrives all at once. She had not been there. She had not been there, and her mother had known, and her mother had written it down, and now it lived in a court record. That moment lasted about 3 seconds. Then she picked up her purse and walked out without looking at me. Marta found me near the door. She did not say anything. She just handed me a small paper bag. I knew what was inside before I opened it. A roll. Still warm from that morning's bake. The same thing my grandmother had given me every school day for 12 years. I made extra, Marta said. Then she walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Eduardo shook my hand. He said, your grandmother would have liked watching that. The woman from the church hugged me. She smelled like the same soap she had always used. The neighbors said their particular quiet things and left. Danny stood with me in the emptying hallway. The appeal window, she said. She has 30 days. I said, I know. She looked at me for a moment. You never told anyone. Not once. You just kept making the pastries. I said, that was the point. She shook her head slowly. She said, don't ever go into litigation. You'd be insufferable. She squeezed my arm and walked to the elevator. I drove back to Clement Street. The bakery was closed. I unlocked the door and went inside. The lights were off. The cases were empty. The oven was cold for the first time in what felt like months. The wooden recipe box was behind the register, where it always was. I stood in the dark bakery for a long time. The room smelled like flour and anise and the particular quiet of a place that has held a lot of living. My grandmother's handwriting was in that box, and her mother's handwriting behind it. The same conversation passed forward. A recipe is not just instructions. It is a conversation with everyone who cooked it before you. I understood it now. All the way down. 6 weeks later, Patricia did not appeal. Greaves filed the notice of non-appeal on a Tuesday. Danny called to tell me, and I said, I know. Douglas's creditor situation became public record when the Franklin County filings hit the local business press. 3 of his former clients filed additional complaints the following month. The consulting firm dissolved in May. Patricia sent one message for weeks after the hearing. No words. Just a photograph, a picture I had never seen, of Rosalie and Patricia together, sometime in the 1980s. Both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Rosalie young. Patricia young. Both of them, for once, in the same place at the same time. I saved the photograph. I put it in the recipe box behind the index cards. In April, I established the Rosalie Ferrante Culinary Scholarship through the local community college, one annual award for a student in the food service and hospitality program, preference given to first-generation college students. It was funded from the estate, per instructions Rosalie had written in a separate document she had left with the attorney. She had planned it before she died. She had just not told me yet. I kept the house on Clement Street. I kept the bakery. I hired a second person for the morning shift. I still open at 4 a.m. I still make the croissants by hand. Some mornings, when the oven is warm and the flour is on my hands and the street outside is still dark, I open the recipe box and read one of her mother's index cards. The pencil faint, the Italian careful, the handwriting of a woman I never met who taught my grandmother everything she knew about what it means to make something with love and leave it behind. I do not need anyone to tell me who I am. My grandmother already did. She wrote it down in blue ink and left it in a wooden box painted blue, chipped at the corners, with a latch that never quite closed. You know the difference between wanting the work and wanting the outcome. That is the only credential that has ever mattered in this kitchen. Some things cannot be taken from you. Not in a courtroom, not by someone who left before the work got hard. If this story reminded you to stand in what you have built, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.